loyal to the great founders of the Theosophical movement, but does not concern itself with dissensions or differences of individual opinion. The work it has on hand and the end it keeps in view are too absorbing and too lofty to leave it the time or inclination to take part in side issues. That work and that end is the dissemination of the fundamental principles of the philosophy of Theosophy and the exemplification in practice of those principles through a truer realization of the self, a profounder conviction of universal brotherhood. It holds that an unassailable basis for union among Theosophists, wherever and however situated, is similarity of aim, purpose, and teaching, and therefore has neither constitution, bylaws, nor officers, the sole bond between its associates being that basis, and it aims to disseminate this idea among Theosophists in the furtherance of unity. It regards as Theosophists all who are engaged in the true service of humanity, without distinction of race, creed, sex, condition, or organization, and it welcomes to its association all those who are in accord with its declared purposes and who desire to fit themselves by study and otherwise to be the better able to help and teach others. The true Theosophist belongs to no cult or sect, yet belongs to each and all.
Thank you. Our devotional reading is from The Voice of the Silence. The Voice was written by H.P. Blavatsky from fragments she had memorized from the book of the Golden Precepts, put into the hands of mystic students and accepted by many Theosophists. So a student volunteer will read from the next excerpt starting on page 44.
But if thou wouldst nirvana reach, or cast the prize away, let not the fruit of action and inaction be thy motive, thou of dauntless heart. Know that the bodhisattva whose liberation changes for renunciation to don the miseries of secret life is called thrice honored, O thou candidate for woe through the cycles. The path is one, disciple, yet in the end twofold. Marked are its stages by 4 and 7 portals. At one end, bliss immediate, and at the other, bliss deferred. Both are of merit the reward. The choice is thine. The one becomes the two, the open and the secret. The first one leadeth to the goal, the second to self-immolation. When to the permanent is sacrificed the mutable, the prize is thine, the drop returneth whence it came. The open path leads to the changeless change, nirvana, the glorious state of absoluteness, the bliss past human thought. Thus the first path is liberation, but path the second is renunciation, and therefore called the path of woe. The secret path leads the Arhan to mental woe unspeakable, woe for the living dead, and helpless pity for the men of karmic sorrow, the fruit of karmic sages dare not still. For it is written, teach to eschew all causes, the ripple of effect, as a great tidal wave, thou shalt let run its course. Shall I pause there?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, and we now have the 3 fundamentals, which is a basis for all of nature's laws, if you will, and the theosophical, the secret doctrine. So, do we have a volunteer to do that, or should I do it?
I could do that, if that's okay. Okay.
Okay.
The secret doctrine establishes 3 fundamental propositions. The first fundamental statement of the secret doctrine is a metaphysical, one absolute, an omnipresent, eternal, boundless, and immutable principle on which all speculation is impossible, since it transcends the power of human conception, can only be dwarfed by any human expression or similitude. It is beyond the range and reach of thought, in the words of Mandukya, unspeakable and unthinkable. It is a beingness rather than being, and is beyond all thought or speculation. The second fundamental assertion of the secret doctrine is the absolute universality of the law of periodicity, of flux and reflux, ebb and flow, which physical science has observed and recorded in all departments of nature. The third fundamental proposition of the secret doctrine asserts the identity of souls with the universal oversoul. It describes the obligatory pilgrimage of every soul through the cycle of incarnation in accordance with cyclic and karmic law. In order for every divine soul to acquire an independent or conscious existence, it has to have passed through every elemental form of the phenomenal world of that manvantara and acquired individuality or consciousness, first by natural impulse and then by self-induced, self-devised efforts, and thus ascending through all the degrees of intelligence from the lowest to the highest minus from the mineral and plant to the highest archangel.
Thank you. And now for today's talk on thought, will, and desire.
Okay, I'm gonna share my screen. Hey friends, thought, will, and desire are three powers in man that are inextricably interwoven. Understanding each power and how they interact is important in knowing not only ourselves, but in understanding how to make the best use of these powers, and ultimately how to reach the goal of living consciously a life of and one with spirit. Thought we'll consider first. When we consider the idea of thought, we must remember that there cannot be thought without a thinker. There are no thoughts that arise of themselves. They are all produced by intelligent beings of various grades, no matter what kind of thoughts they are. We are all thinkers and we all have minds. But of what does the mind consist? The mind itself is the power to think. The bundles of ideas that we call our minds are the products of the thinking faculty. They are the effects of intelligent ideation, and we have to go further and further back from the effects perceived in order to know the causes of those effects, namely the ideas that we hold. So many of the ideas we hold unconsciously to ourselves, because we may have absorbed them through the environment of our education or upbringing. We have to examine each belief to know what constitutes our mind and our ideas. Yet we ought to recognize and realize that from the very outset, that we are not those ideas. We hold ideas and we shape our behavior around them, but we can change our minds and we can change our ideas. Mind itself is not limited. We all have the unlimited power to think in any and all directions. We think that our ideas are ours, but when we come to self-analysis, we find that not one thought in a million is an independent thought. Not one in a million is a thinker who creates his own thoughts from a realization of the universality of nature and the common source from which we all spring. If one thinks about it, it is strange that we do not see that there is a common source for us all and for all of our powers. That only the use of life and the life powers differs in each being according to the ideas each one holds. We all have the power to think and we all think differently, and that makes us seem to be different, but we are not so different from each other. Also, we live in a world of effects. We're often overwhelmed mentally by these effects and are unable to extricate ourselves from them. So what is most needed in the world is a realization of what our real nature is. If we find what our own real nature is, then we shall know what the real nature of every other being is, whether that being is below us in point of intelligence or as far above us as has yet been attained by any being. If we are ever going to know anything of the common source of our being and of our powers, we have to gain that knowledge within ourselves. by obtaining self-knowledge. Each one of us springs from the same supreme source or supreme spirit. Each is a ray or spark of this one supreme spirit, is one with it in his innermost nature. This supreme spirit is beyond form and beyond expression. Where is the man who can say what that is within himself, which sees, which knows, which feels, which experiences, which garners the results of all experience? Each one is a fragment of that infinite source, because all have the same infinite root. Each one is a unique expression of it. If a man does not understand what his real source is, what his real nature is, and assumes himself to be that which he is not, then all of his exercise and the power to think, all of his creative thoughts, and all of his subsequent actions will follow the lines of this incomplete basis of thought and action. If he thinks he is a poor, miserable sinner who cannot do anything of himself, then a poor, miserable sinner he will be. But if he realizes that all the effects which surround him are due to his thinking, then he can create better effects by thinking differently. That all things are within his reach, he will gain new insights and a greater strength. He will get beyond effects to the field of causes and begin to realize that all things are alike in their essential nature. He finds from this consideration that the universe exists under law. The very highest being is under law, just the same as the very lowest. The law does not exist outside of us, and it is not put in motion by some being or beings outside of us, but is inherent in each one of us. As we act, we experience the reaction. As we think, so we become. In accordance with the intelligence of our action, so will be the expression returning to us. Ye sow, so shall ye also reap. As we are now reaping, so we must have sown in the past. We have in these ideas the first and final expression of justice, that we reap what we have sown. In whatever conditions we may find ourselves, we have to admit that they are our own productions. How were they originally produced? By the thoughts of the thinker, often based on false ideas and false conclusions. The power of the Supreme is in everyone. No matter what the man thinks, there is power in it, and if he holds to that thinking, he's bound to produce the effects that flow from the lines of his thought. We are bewildered by the very effects that surround us, and we have produced them by our thinking based on wrong and incomplete ideas. Each one of us has pursued his own individual path, as if he were separate from all the rest, and so each one of us has created the conditions under which we exist, the experiences that bring us suffering or enjoyment. We often think that good and evil are things in themselves, but they aren't. There is nothing good in and of itself. There is nothing evil in and of itself. Good and evil are relative and are the effects felt by us. What is good to one may be evil to another. It depends on the recipient and upon his attitude of mind. If we see that law rules and recognize that these effects were produced by ourselves, that we receive the exact return of causes set in motion by ourselves, then we see that whatever we do or have done affects ourselves as well as all others for good or evil, and that we must in time pay the debts incurred or receive back the benefits. The good that comes is what we have earned through service to others. The evil that befalls us is also what we have earned by a lack of service or by injury to others. Every effect is the continuation of the cause set in motion by ourselves and by our thought. There is a true idea to be established in us, that our individual responsibility to all others for the use of our powers, including especially thought, in it is implied the spiritual identity of all beings, the divinity of every being that exists, not only of mankind, the good and bad natures there, but every being below us as well as every being above us. This presents the fact that all powers of perception, of experience, of knowledge, of wisdom, lie for each being within himself in his innermost nature. And it brings instantly to our minds the idea of development, of unfoldment, of evolution. There are embryonic souls below us in their various stages of progress, and there are the souls of men with their varying degrees of development, and there are great souls, men who have gone through the stages we are now passing through. This whole universe is made up of beings. The form or physical body of a being is the home or the instrument of some minor or greater intelligence. It can be said, no intelligence, no form, no intelligence, no action, no intelligence, no responsibilities of any kind. Wherever you find actions and conditions, there you get intelligence. And wherever there is intelligence, there is thought and responsibility. So the universe exists for one purpose and for one purpose only, for the soul's experience and emancipation. Soul here means the acquired experience of the spiritual being. In the vast universe with such an innumerable and immeasurable range of intelligent beings, differing infinitely in their respective degrees of acquired intelligence or soul, where or what would be the storehouse of thought? In this vast assemblage of beings, there are many, many kinds of thought. There are the thoughts or ideas of all the men now on earth, and of those who have already been on earth. The thoughts or expressions of all the beings below man. The thoughts and ideas and expressions of all the beings above man. All of these make a vast storehouse of thought. But none of us can draw from that storehouse, other than he puts himself in a position to receive. He must make room for it, and make his nature en rapport with the ideas he seeks. All that we perceive directly is ideas. Behind all action is thought of some kind, is the kinds of ideas we hold that make us pursue good or evil, and therefore receive good or evil. Now we can see how important it is that we should know what we really are, become acquainted with our own nature, and have that as a basis of our thought and action. Upon the quality of the thought depends the quality or kind of action. It is a sequence. And so what is needed is an orderly succession of thoughts based on our true natures, and action in accordance with them. Then everything flows along the line of divine unfoldment, of divine evolution. Then one is working in accord with nature and in accord with all others. Now to move to the subject of the will, which has not been treated of much in theosophical works, but here we'll consider it as best we can. The only possible way of understanding or explaining the nature of any being is through the lens of evolution, as previously mentioned. This grand unfolding from within outwards, the expression of spirit or consciousness through the intelligence acquired and the instruments evolved. There is this statement, the will of spirit in action has produced everything that exists. Will is said to be the offspring of the divine, the God in man, while desire is the motive power of animal life, and we'll discuss desire more later on. But if we understand that will, that intelligent will lies behind everything that exists, that is the cause of everything that is the creator in the universe, we can perhaps gain some idea of what is necessary for us to know in order to properly use our own powers of thought, will, and desire. We all stand as creators in the midst of our creations. Will is universal. There are creators below us in the scale of intelligence, but with a narrower range of vision than we have. So we can see that below us, infinitely below, are beings so small that many of them could be gathered on the point of a needle. From the smallest conceivable point of perception and action, there is a constantly widening range of expression, of evolution, a development more and more in the direction of a greater range of being and a greater expression of power. This evolution of intelligence or soul proceeds very slowly in the lower kingdoms, but more rapidly in the animal kingdom, and in man has reached the stage where the being himself knows that he is conscious, that he can understand to some extent his own nature and the natures of the beings below him, and see their mutual relations with each other. Man has now reached a point where he begins to inquire what more there is for him to know. He has ceased to think exclusively of the material. He is sensing his own nature, and he asks, what am I? Where did I come from? And where do I go from here? It's important to understand that will belongs not only to man and animals, but also to every other natural kingdom. There is will in the plant kingdom, and there is will in the mineral kingdom, though we may not fully understand its expression. For people, the good and bad man alike both have will. The child as well as the aged person, the wise as well as the lunatic. It is therefore a power that is devoid in itself of moral quality. That moral quality is added by man and colored, so to speak, by his motive. So the truth is that will acts according to the desires, or as the ancients used to say, behind will stands desire. This is why the child, the lunatic, and the wicked man so often exhibit a stronger will than ordinary persons do. In the case of the wicked man, he has intensified his desires, and with that his will. In the case of the lunatic, he has but few desires, and therefore draws all his will force into these. And in the case of the savage, he is free from convention, free from the various ideas, laws, rules, and suppositions to which the civilized person is subject, and therefore he has nothing to distract his will. Will is the exclusive possession of man on this plane of consciousness. It divides him from the animal in whom instinctive desire only is active. I just said that there is will in the other kingdoms, but it's not individualized like it is in man. So it's important to make that distinction. And that's what that last sentence was saying. Since the soul is the perceiver and it looks directly on ideas, the action of the will is also through ideas and desires. And the ideas we hold give it its direction. Small ideas, small force. Large ideas, large force. The force itself is illimitable, for it is the force of spirit, which is infinite and exhaustless. What we lack are the large or universal ideas. We need to arouse in ourselves that power of perception which will lay the whole field of being and universal ideas open to us. A stream cannot rise higher than its source. We need to return to this source, this storehouse of thought. So it follows that to make our will strong, we must have fewer desires. Let those few be high, pure, and altruistic desires, brought to activity through concentration, and as such will give us a strong will intent upon aiding all of humanity. No practices will develop the will per se, for it exists forever fully developed in itself. But practice will develop in us the power to call on the will. Concentration and meditation are keys to developing these abilities. Will and desire lie at the doors of meditation and concentration. If we were to desire truth with the same intensity that we had formerly wished for success, money, or gratification, we would speedily acquire meditation and possess concentration. If we do all of our acts, small and great, every moment, for the sake of the whole human race, as representing the Supreme Self, then every cell and fiber of the body and inner man will be turned in one direction, resulting in perfect concentration. Let us meditate on that which is in us as the highest self. Concentrate upon it and will ourselves to work for it as dwelling in every human heart. Another way to think of will is that it is the power that underlies evolution. All the beings involved in this grand evolutionary process make up both the world and its inhabitants. All that exists is self-produced, self-evolved. The creation of spiritual beings acting in, on, and through each other. The whole force of evolution and the whole power behind it is the human will, so far as humanity is concerned. We need to realize that every form occupied by any being is composed of many lives, each undergoing its own evolution, aided, impelled, or hindered by the force of the higher form of consciousness that evolved it. For this universe is embodied consciousness, or spirit, and just as a single drop of water contains within it every element and characteristic of the whole ocean, so each being, however low in the degree of its intelligence, contains within itself the potentiality and possibilities of the highest. The final takeaway is that the will of the spirit in action has produced all that is. Next, to speak on desire. Desire in its widest application is one of the creative forces of the universe. In one sense, it is indistinguishable from will, but we men never know desire under this form while we remain only men. Therefore, in this discussion, will and desire will be considered as opposed to each other. Will, we said earlier, is the offspring of the divine, the God in man, and desire the motive power of animal life. Most men live in and by desire, mistaking it for the will or for thought. But he who would achieve wisdom must separate thought and will from desires and make his will the ruler, because desire is unstable and ever-changing, while will is steady and constant. Both will and desire are creators, forming the man himself and his surroundings, but will creates intelligently, desire blindly and unconsciously. The man therefore makes himself in the image of his desires, unless he creates himself in the likeness of the divine through his will and through his thought. Man's task then is 1, to awaken the will, 2, to strengthen it by use and conquest, to make it the absolute ruler within his body. And 3, parallel to this, to purify his desires to line up with will and the greater goal. HPB has said that knowledge and will are the tools for accomplishing the purification of desire. What is desire? The ancients and the theosophists know desire to be a principle in and of itself, and not merely impulses from the body. It is called kama, and it forms a body, the body of desire. Contrary to how it seems, the passions and desires are not produced by the body, but on the contrary, the body is caused to be by the passions and desires. It is desire and passion which caused us to be born, and will bring us to birth again and again. It is by passion and desire we are made to evolve through the mansions of death called lives here on earth. It was by the arising of desire in the unknown first cause, the one absolute existence, that the whole collection of worlds was manifested. And by means of the influence of desire in the now manifested world, is the latter kept in existence. So desire is necessary, but this karma principle can be seen as the balance principle of the 7 principles of man and nature. It stands in the middle, and from it, the ways go up or down. And this is why it's so key to our current stage of development. As humanity is now, desire is the basis of action and the mover of the will. As the old Hermeticists have said, behind will stands desire. For whether we wish to do well or ill, we have first to arouse within us the desire for either course. Desires arouse the will, and the will, guided by intelligence, thought, and other soul powers, brings us to the final goal. It cannot be completed by desire alone. Will has to be brought to bear on those desires. The good man, who at last becomes even as a sage, had at one time in his many lives to arouse the desire to become a sage, to arouse the desire for the company of holy men, and to keep this desire for progress alive in order to continue on his way. Even a Buddha or a Jesus had first to make a vow, which is a desire in some life, that he would save the world or some part of it, and to persevere with the desire alive in his heart through countless lives. And equally so, on the other hand, the bad man, life after life, took unto himself low, selfish, and wicked desires, thus debasing instead of purifying this principle. On the material and scientific side of occultism, the use of the inner hidden powers of our nature, if this principle of desire be not strong, the master power of imagination cannot do its work, because though it makes a mold or a matrix, the will cannot act unless it is moved, directed, and kept up to pitch by desire. So we need desire. We need few but strong desires, but in the right direction and purified by thought. The desires and passions therefore have 2 aspects, the one being low and the other being high. The low is that shown by the constant placing of the consciousness entirely in the body and the astral body, and produces sensations and more desires, a never-ending series. The high comes from the influence of an aspiration to the higher principles of mind, buddhi, and spirit. Desires here can be transmuted into will through intelligence and imagination and creativity. This karma desire principle is like the sign Libra in the path of the sun through the zodiac. When the sun, who is like the real man, reaches that sign, he trembles in the balance. Should he go backwards, the worlds he created would be destroyed. Should he go onward, then the whole human race is lifted up to perfection, though it is not an easy path. During life, the desires and passions are with the astral body and throughout the entire lower man. They are enmeshed with the physical body. Each one of us has the power to add to or diminish those desires, to make them weak or increase them in strength, debase them or purify them. There is a continual choice, a battle, as it were. At death, the astral body and the karma principle of passion and desire leave the physical body in company and coalesce. It is then that the term kama-rupa may be applied, as kama-rupa is really made of the astral body and the kama passions in conjunction. And this joining of the 2 makes a shape or a form which, though ordinarily invisible, is still material and may be made visible. Although it is empty of mind and conscience, it still has powers and energies of its own that can be exercised whenever the conditions permit. These conditions can be furnished by a medium. The astral spook or kama-rupa is but the mass of the desires and passions abandoned by the real person, who at death has fled into heaven and has no further concerns with it. Hence, being devoid of the nobler soul of thought and mind, these passions and desires work only on the very lowest part of the medium's nature and stir up no good elements, but always the lower leanings of the being. Passions and desires, together with the astral body, are common both to men and to animals, and also to the vegetable kingdom, though in the last it is but faintly developed. And at one period in our evolution, no further material principles had been developed, and the three higher principles of mind, soul, and spirit were latent and unexpressed. Up to this point, man and animal were equal. But the development of mind made man self-conscious, and it constituted the great differentiation. The God within begins with manas, or mind, and thought, and it is the struggle between this God and the animal nature below which Theosophy speaks of and warns about. We cannot rise up to know the higher principles while in a body unless the self first asserts in itself the desire to do better. Rising up is not possible unless desire is present to give the impulse. And by the use of this principle of passion, all the higher qualities are brought to bear at last in this grand evolutionary journey. The passions give the impetus to thought and will to transmute them all to make a marriage with the higher principles. So by refining and elevating our desires, by continually placing them upon truth and spirit, we are able to raise up the lower nature and the whole of matter to the level of conscious godhood. Theosophy teaches that at the present point of man's evolution, he has fully developed the lower four principles, including the desire principle, but the higher principles are only partly developed. Hence it is taught that today man shows himself to still be moved primarily by the passions and desires. But as mind is being evolved more and more, and as we proceed in our course along the lines of spiritual development, there can be perceived the beginning of the transition from the animal to the man of complete mind. We are now in such a transition period where this process is widely going on everywhere with all of humankind. The Theosophist sees all around him the evidence that the race mind is changing by its increased use and by enlargement, by the greater use and facility of the mind. The old days of dogmatism are disappearing and the age of inquiry has come about. These inquiries will grow louder and louder until the answers required satisfy the mind as it grows. Eventually, all dogmatism and blind belief will be ended, and the race will be ready to face all problems, each man for himself, and at the same time, all working for the good of the whole. The end will be the perfection of those who now struggle to overcome the passions and desires. Theosophy asks everyone to reflect whether any action one is about to undertake gives way to the animal below or looks up to and is governed by the God within. This great message of Theosophy has provided the means by which each one may know the truth about himself, and not only his nature, but all of nature. Everything that humanity needs to achieve this goal has been given to us. Thus, desire awakens in us the desire to journey to the goal and to achieve. Thought is required to design a way forward through the many obstacles and allows us to laser focus in and see things correctly. Thought also gives us the correct basis from which to expand. And the will is the energy and principle that finally conquers this pervading sense of separateness, bringing us to the practical knowledge of the one life in spirit, which is the reality of who we really are, and opens to us a universe of possibilities as we progress onwards to the next stage of evolution, that of conscious godhood. So that concludes the talk, and I'll open it up for like questions or comments. Someone raised a hand. Herb, is that you? I think you're muted.
That helps. Thank you. Yeah, you have touched on all three of those fundamentals that I understand it anyway. But if we can't really separate them out in practical terms, we have to think about all three of them. First is as a Christian, being raised in that environment, we don't have that higher self. We say we have a higher self, and that is God in the Christian perspective. But we can't really separate them out. We have to think of ourselves as gods to raise ourselves up to that level, because we have to. First is we have to, that environment that you refer to is there for us to learn from. That's the word I read is that it is there for us to learn, for us to learn from, and to raise up all beings above. So I guess my question is, do we have to think about, we have to disaggregate, I guess, to understand this. But the way you presented it, you've got to think about all that as you go along with the right attitude, which is that I call it the we're boots on the ground for the greater cause.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things mentioned is that we're always acting on and through other beings. Like, even we know from Theosophy that the energy of our thought is sort of is taken up by the elementals, these finest points of matter, though invisible to us. They're still beings at some point of evolution. And these elemental kingdoms are below the mineral, below the physical. But nonetheless, we're always acting on and through other beings. So it just shows, contrary to Christian, where like all the beings are separate, God's sort of outside of us, that we're enmeshed in and among other beings. Our bodies are composed of plant life, animal life, mineral life. They're lives that we use because we have a stronger, a wider vision, a larger basis of thought, a stronger will, more knowledge. But when we think that when we stop and realize that we're acting constantly in and on other beings, it kind of changes the equation in terms of, what the goal is and how to, how do we want to treat other beings. That bears on our karma, because if we abuse the body, it comes back to us and we feel it pretty quickly. Some results we feel sooner than others, but when we put all the ideas together that Theosophy presents, it gives us sort of a grander picture, and like was mentioned, large vision, large ideas, large force. The grander our conception, the more complete it is, the more accurately we're going to see reality as it is and act in accordance with evolution, which is, involves expanding the mind to a level of conscious godhood till we realize that we are that spark. Right now, we sort of have to, explore that idea within ourselves and maybe place some trust and faith that it's true and to test it out. But ultimately, the truth will be obvious because it fits together as a complete system, for one, and the ancients have always maintained this knowledge, and Theosophy has given us, some fragments of that, enough for us to chew on, to turn in the direction that we need to for our own progress. Yeah, Cyrus?
So thoughts are given off from the thinking principle of manas, and as you pointed out, that every thought empowers an elemental, a life that then goes on and can inspire others to either do good or to do bad. So really, having the principle of thinking gives us freedom of choice, and with choice comes responsibility as well. How do we use our monastic principle to either elevate people around us or to drag people down? So that it's important to understand that aspect as well. So thank you for excellent talk.
Oh, you're welcome. I mean, most of this is from Judge and Crosby and can be found in Universal Theosophy or in some of the Lucifer and Theosophist articles. But yeah, that point that you brought up is really important. I'm trying to find where it was. The form of a being is its instrument, but so wherever you find a form, there is some level of intelligence, as was said, and where there is an intelligence, there's action, and where there's action, there's karma or responsibility, and it can't be avoided. We wouldn't want to have thought or action without responsibility. Really, it has to they exist as one because the effect is wrapped up in the cause. They can't really be separated. And the more that we gain an understanding practically how that works, I think the better able we'll be able to navigate this world, thoughts, causes, and actions without, producing unnecessary or harmful reactions. It said that the adepts can, they choose their thoughts and they they can avoid bad karma if they want to, simply by understanding how thought, action, and reaction works, how the attitude, the quality, the largeness of the thought, so to speak, plays into the wider world of beings and thoughts and intelligences. And it's for the, as was said, it's for the soul's experience in emancipation. And that, I always found that interesting, that the idea of the emancipation is sort of like built in. It is the purpose that we, work through this stage, but we surpass it. That's built in. So, but as Theosophy says, it's through self-induced and self-devised efforts. It's not going to happen automatically. So we have to figure it out and go stage by stage, step by step, helping each other. Herb?
Yeah, I was thinking about this, how we every atom has got this in it that you're talking about, and we're made up of millions of those things. And where do they come from? They come from out there. So the what I'm trying to say is that the physical in the uh, higher level is all uh, uh, enmeshed in that, which comes from just like I thought you said, our thoughts really are based on more universal things than we think they are. So are these. So this conglomeration of atoms that makes up our bodies and makes up our thinking and makes up all of that stuff. It said that we through our prior life thinking, we attract those things, and then it's up to us to, as gods within that body that we are, to make them work for the benefit of all. Is that fair?
Yeah, because if we don't, if we act selfishly, just for ourselves, where does that lead? What's the end result of that? It's not a larger focus, it becomes a narrower focus. And eventually, because we are all one, because we're all sparks from the one life, it's sort of like trying to go against the truth of the universe. It's like trying to swim upstream. It's just eventually gonna fail. And that's the battle, is the self seeing ourselves as separate and wanting things, whatever, thinking for ourselves, and missing the bigger picture of who we really are, unless that piece is there. And that's why the great teachers bring this message periodically. Unless that understanding of the one life is present, it's always going to fail. It's always going to like invert on itself. Selfishness and personal, it's not sustainable. And essentially that's what those who pursue that path and maybe even become like supremely selfish, it can't be sustained. Like nature eventually reacts upon it, because it's not in line with the truth of the reality of the one life. And we forget that. All this we know, but we tend to forget. So it's good to be reminded, to read periodically, and to concentrate on universal ideas, to continually bring our thought back to that sort of like original basis, because it's easy to get distracted by all the material around us. And of course, it's hard to do because, all the other people in the world are thinking their selfish thoughts, or maybe some universal thoughts, but the ratio, the balance has got to start moving more towards the universal, because we get sort of like in a feedback loop, being influenced by others, other selfish thoughts causes us to create selfish thoughts. Our selfish thoughts cause others to create selfish thoughts. So it's difficult, but the more the ideas of universality and the one life can sort of act like leavening in our thoughts and in the wider society, the better. And this is why, it's seen like as a battle between the higher and lower nature, because we're kind of in the thick of it. As was said, we've perfected the desire principle, but mind isn't fully incarnated. We're still like working with the mind. That's really the battleground at this point.
And the battleground for each one of us goes up through the collective to understand. I'm thinking about global warming. We are now beginning to realize that, hey, we better act collectively on that field, but the proof is in the pudding is yet, because we have to keep working at that. And if we don't do it right, if we don't learn to do it right, then we get washed out. Is that it? Basically, we don't. As individuals, as souls, we don't. We get to recycle, if you will. But at least that tells us that we should work together to make the best of ourselves and everything around us. Is my thinking on it.
Yeah, it requires a lot of patience with ourselves and with others. Understanding that we're all doing our best. We all need reminders. And I think that's why, it takes so long. The evolutionary scheme is, it can't incarnate instantly. You can't have full mind. It would, maybe destroy the instrument. That's why we have to, through self-induced, self-devised efforts, awaken it and gain experience on the plane of mind, and choosing our thoughts, and using those seed thoughts for concentration and meditation to naturally open up those higher realms, because a thought at a very high level is going to have a lot more power and influence over so many beings. That's why we have to purify our desires at this stage. We can't wait and do it later. It has to be now.
So that's a lot to digest, what you've presented, and we all have to do it in our own way. We have to work at it, and if we do it, we will eventually succeed. That's the way I understand it. But we have to start now, like you said, wherever we are at, we have to do the best we can, and that brings us on to the next level. We also have to, like you said, focused. Like that the idiot and so forth. They only have one thing to a few things. So you said we have to do a few things too, and that comes into meditation. We have to focus on those higher thoughts. And
yeah, it seems like a sort of like a non sequitur. In order to expand, we have to focus in. But that's so we can gain control over the powers of thought and mind, and then we'll be ready to hold ourselves up in that greater expanded environment.
So this is a never-ending process. You didn't put an end to it. We don't have an end to it, right? Because as we develop individually, collectively, we just go to the next level. Even when we become perfected, they said with the seventh round or so forth, we all perfected beings at that point. That's all that on this earth, if you will. It's hard to imagine, but that's a long time away. We can shorten it, or we can lengthen it, or we can. I guess it depends on our attitude, like you said, and us working together and trying to bring out the best in all of us.
Yeah, that would be, once we perfect ourselves in this stream of evolution, the secret doctrine doesn't treat of others, but it basically implies that this is just one and many, and there's infinite possibilities, because the one life is inexhaustible, ever present, it always is the source of all. So it implies that once we perfect, at the 7th round, 7th race, that there will be another stage. And as we get closer, maybe we'll have a better idea what that is. For now, we can only imagine it.
Well, you got first principle is beyond human thought. If you feel, although we can figure out a lot, it's always going to be there, beyond the human thought. As long as we recognize that we're working in that direction, that's what we can do at this point, right? Well, we will. Do we have anything else, Kathy? Okay. This has been very enlightening to me, and I hope that people will continue to think about what you presented to us. And we have the Bhagavad Gita coming up in a few minutes. If we could take a short break, if we want to, and we can come back and continue with our discussion of the Bhagavad Gita. But thank you again for your presentation.
Do you want to talk at a certain time? Like,
within 5 minutes.
Okay.
That gives it time to. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation, Kathy.
You're welcome. Thanks, Carolina.
Thank you,
Take care.
Kathy.
See you soon.
Well, I hope to see you all in about 5 minutes.